Bree here, and since I did my first skills that they don't teach you in school video, I've gotten some requests to do another. So here I am with another one, and this one is centered solely around relationships. And that's not technically just like dating relationships, this is all kinds of relationships. When it comes to relationship advice in school, pretty much all you really get is, don't give in to peer pressure and don't get intimate. But you can follow the advice of all the most well-intentioned teachers and still end up in a toxic relationship. And I say this from first-hand experience. The number one thing to implement in every kind of relationship is boundaries. Know your limits and communicate them. If I'd said to my high school best friend that it hurts when she puts down my style and the things that I like, it might have saved our friendship. Honestly, I don't know. There was a lot of other issues there, but I can't really blame her, or at least I can't put all the blame on her for violating boundaries that I never set. Some other examples of boundaries are things like, I'm not really a hugger, or this topic makes me uncomfortable, can we change the subject? Or, hey, I don't really do good with last minute plans, could you give me 3 days to a week's notice when you want to set something up, and I will be way more enthusiastic about it. I mean, that's something I've had to set because I need to prepare myself mentally before going into any plans for the most part. The most important thing to remember about setting boundaries is just lay it out calmly. Don't be accusatory, just be like, hey, here's where I'm coming from, this is the boundary I need to set. If this is breaking a formed habit from the other person, it might take them a little bit to get used to these new boundaries. So cut them some slack while still holding to your boundaries, if that makes sense. If they mess up a couple times, just gently remind them of your boundaries. But if they start actively ignoring it, then obviously that's a huge red flag. And alternatively, if you have a friend or family member who is trying to set up some boundaries with you, just keep in mind that that is their way of preserving your relationship and it is not meant to hurt you. So always be open whenever people approach you about setting some boundaries. Another one of the biggest tips that I can offer is to pay attention to the way that they treat others. You might have heard, when you go on a first date with a guy or a girl, pay attention to the way that they treat waitstaff because that is indicative of the kind of person they really are. So this is kind of like that, although I think it goes for many other settings aside from just this. One thing that I at least have noticed and have had happen to me is if you notice that your friends are gossiping to you about other friends, that kind of shows the value they place on people's friendships. So if they're talking to you about them, chances are they're also talking to them about you. And I know that seems like something that's obvious when you say it, but when you're in that situation, it is so easy to make excuses for your friends. It's like, oh, she must just be really irritated about this, or, oh, it's just because of this and this that's going on. So when you catch yourself starting to make those excuses, take a step back and examine whether or not you might be lying to yourself, because I have been in this situation. My very, very best friends would talk to me about her other friends. And at first I'm like, well, I mean, we're lifelong best friends. It's different for us, right? It wasn't. I eventually found out. So, yeah, that's definitely a big red flag if you see that happening. And at the risk of this turning into a signs of a toxic relationship video, which that's not what this is, but my next tip is to pay close attention to how they react in a disagreement. Do they listen to you? In my experience with healthy relationships, the majority of disagreements really just come from misunderstandings. So whenever Stephen says or does something that upsets me, I just calmly explain to him how it made me feel and why. He listens, asks any questions that he has, and then apologizes, says where he was coming from, and then we talk together about what we can both change to prevent another miscommunication like we had. We've been together for 6.5 years and have never had what most people would consider to be a fight, because we just talk out our problems and calmly resolve them. Some definite red flags and disagreements are yelling, immediately getting defensive, not hearing you out, and playing the victim. My ex was a master at that last one. And I have a cat in my backdrop now, don't I? Okay, well, I'm just gonna continue. He can do what he wants. Like I said, my ex was a master at playing the victim. Every time I brought up something that he did that upset me, by the end of the conversation, I was the one consoling him and was begging him to forgive me for bringing it up in the first place. And I still don't know how that always happened, but that's just how it always worked for us, so I definitely recommend avoiding that. So this next tip can definitely be challenging at times, and it's keep your life balanced. When you enter into a new relationship, it's so tempting to spend all your free time with them. I mean, that's kind of a cliche, you know, the high school or middle school girl gets a new boyfriend, abandons her friends, and only hangs out with them, or vice versa. But this can also be seen as abandoning your old friends for a new friend, or what I think is even more common, sadly, abandoning yourself. There's no real rule to follow for how much time to spend with everyone. Just make sure you're purposefully making time for the rest of your friends and some good me time as well. And yeah, it's not easy to balance every relationship you have. I'm not a master at this at all. I mean, you can talk to my best friend and we will go for huge spans of time without talking to each other, and then one of us will message the other like, hey, just so you know, I still love you. To be honest, that's what a lot of adult relationships look like though, because we're just so busy with our lives. So also just being understanding when people get busy with themselves, because you should always prioritize your own health first. My last tip for this video is one of my absolute favorites. I love learning about this stuff, and it is to be aware of differences in love languages. So if you're not aware, there are 5 main love languages: quality time, words of affirmation, physical touch, acts of service, and gifts. All these will be ranked differently for everyone, and there are lots of tests out there to take if you want to find out like what your love languages are. And it's also, I think, important to note that the way you best receive love isn't necessarily the same way you most often show love. For example, my primary love language is definitely quality time by far, but the way I most often show love is by giving gifts. I am obsessed with gift giving. So it's important to be aware of the love languages of those closest to you. Because, like, if their love language is words of affirmation, for example, and you only show love through acts of service, then it doesn't matter how much you do for them. If you don't verbally tell them what they mean to you, they'll start to feel like that you don't care. And if you're sitting over there going, but I did this for you, I did this for you, I did this for you, they'll just be like, well, it just seemed like you were going through the motions to try to act like you care, because that is not how they feel loved. This is definitely something that my husband and I have had to learn. His primary love language is physical touch, which is the lowest for me. So I've had to make the conscious efforts to do things like giving him a random hug throughout the day, or just resting my hand on his arm means the world to him, and it's something I would not normally think about. These aren't things that I necessarily mind doing, it's just not the way I naturally think to show love to someone. So I've had to make the habits, because I want him to know that he's loved, and so I need to show it in the way that he feels most loved. What's your love language? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know what other kinds of skills you'd like me to share with you. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please leave a like, and if you want to keep watching, there should be another video popping up right here. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe to become a part of the Ineffable community, because you are ineffable.